Hello, the name is Osvaldo Antonio Nyaka, and welcome to another one of these short enlightenment videos where we look at human behavior, and in the process, I share a bit of principles that you can apply and see what they can do in relation to empowering you and you awakening your own inner being and your own vastness of truth, as I love to put it. Today's principle, we're going to be talking about the feeling of inadequacy, or you being able to clear the feeling or the misperception of being inadequate. First of all, here's what I want you to then just imagine. Imagine that you are in a magnetic field, or perhaps imagine a magnet that's got two poles. One is a positive pole, which is up north. Then on the other side, on the opposite side, you've got the negative, which is then the south pole of it. These poles represent your perceptions of positive and negative, or they present the different aspects of the brain or the mind, which is then one is the positive and the other one is then the negative. What's profound about this principle of the magnet is that if you take a magnet which has these two poles, the positive and the negative, and you cut it in half, you will still be left with the positive and the negative on the magnet. Even if you further cut it down, you still have the positive and the negative pole of these polar opposites going on. So no matter how much or how many times you cut down a magnet, these two poles come integrated. And this principle actually speaks about the integration of perceptions and how these perceptions come about. Now, if you remember in one of the videos that we did, I think in the beginning, is we spoke about these ratios of perceptions, that the more polarized you are towards the positive is the more you negate the negative aspect of being or existence. And anytime these two polar opposites are separated, you create a degree of either a fantasy or an extreme nightmare. You create an extreme fantasy or you create an extreme nightmare the more these polars are separated. And with that, we actually also discussed and discovered that Heraclitus was one of the forefounders who spoke about these realities, that in reality you can never get a negative without a positive. And his work went on to influence different thinkers and philosophers, and the theory or the whole field of quantum physics is actually based on this principle that you cannot get a negative pole without a positive pole. Now, how does this tie in with human behavior and human consciousness? So suppose you've had a moment in your life where you felt inadequate. I know I have in my own life. There's moments where I feel inadequate. And these moments, when you look back, tying in the principles of these magnets that you're never going to get a positive without a negative pole, is you actually are at a moment, at the specific moment where you perceive yourself to be inadequate. It's actually when you compare yourself to someone else outside of you, or perhaps you compare yourself to a past action where you then have a self-judgment where you believe that you are inadequate. So we're just going to use the example when you've compared yourself to someone other than yourself or someone outside of you, and at that moment you felt inadequate. So perhaps it could have been in a business sense where you came across someone who you believe had a better business judgment or is more entrepreneurial than you are. And at that specific moment, what then happens is you are actually conscious of their adequacy, and you are actually unconscious of where they are inadequate. And therefore, you then become conscious of where you are actually inadequate and unconscious of where you are actually adequate in your own traits and where you actually display this trait. So at that specific moment, what then happens is, again, remember the whole magnet principle? is you're seeing where this person is very adequate. And anytime you judge yourself into something, you're gonna create the equal and opposite of that. So at that specific moment, you saw that, oh, this person is adequate in this area, this person is adequate in doing this, and therefore you brought up your inadequacy in that specific area. So that then was then balanced out. And what you'll then will find is because you didn't see where this individual is inadequate, you judge yourself into them and put yourself down. And anytime you put someone up, in actual fact, you are also doing the equal and opposite of that, which is then putting yourself down in relation to that person. Because if you didn't put that person on a pedestal, you actually wouldn't have a judgment and have that label on there. Now, remember, I said that there are moments where you are actually going to compare yourself to other people. And when you compare yourself to other people, you are actually negating what's inside of you as well. And this happens throughout our whole lives. It's not to say that once you've watched this, that you're actually going to then transcend this whole dynamic of judging yourself compared to others, and you're just going to be a person that doesn't judge anymore. That's not the point of what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that there are ways in which you can clear this and perhaps see yourself where you are actually on the same footing as them. So remember that anytime you feel you are inadequate, you are actually judging and seeing where the other person is adequate, and you are then unconscious of where your adequateness is and where they are actually inadequate. And you will see that when you study human behavior, you're going to see that the principal driving force around human behavior is your hierarchy of values. And in your hierarchy of values, once you discover what they are, you discover where you're most organized, and you discover your hierarchy of values, you will find that in your highest hierarchy of value, you actually integrate these opposites of being adequate and inadequacy. Because in your hierarchy of values, you know that you are adequate enough and you're good enough to do or display these traits of being a genius, of being organized, and putting your life into order in your hierarchy of values. And therefore, when you live in according to your hierarchy of values, what you're then doing is you're saying, I'm going to be adequate in doing A, B, and C. And therefore, I'm going to integrate and delegate where I'm not adequate or inadequacies to other people, so that those people are adequate in doing their thing in their hierarchy of values. And therefore, they then complement you where you are adequate, so they take over your inadequacies. And therefore, you're then able to integrate it. But suppose you find yourself in a situation where you become infatuated with, with an individual that is perhaps displaying this trait of being adequate, and you're like, no, I'm not as adequate as that person is. What you can do is find out how they are being adequate. In other words, you'll go in there and then find out what the trait is. What is it that they are doing or not doing that makes that label come true of them being adequate? Perhaps it could be, again, someone who's entrepreneurial, and the trait or the judgment could then be that they handle finances carefully, and you see that they handle finances carefully, and you're overly infatuated with that. And because you're overly infatuated with that, you're not seeing where you are actually handling money the same way as they do, or to the same degree that they do. So that's the reason why you're infatuated with their adequacies and then judge yourself to be inadequate. What you can then do is go to the moments where you were actually displaying that same trait of being adequate with the thing that you're judging. So in other words, you're then taking what's unconscious in your mind and bringing it to the conscious level where you get to see to the same degree that you also display this trait. And when you do that, you're then going back into your memories where you're actually finding out where you displayed this trait of being adequate. And the moment you do that, again, you're lifting up the moments where you are unconscious of your own abilities with the things that you're judging. And you'll find that when you actually do this, we use the DiMartini method. And by using the DiMartini method, what you're then doing is, in the specific column, you are actually confirming reflectiveness. You are actually confirming that the judgments that you have inside yourself are within other people. And the reason why you're judging that person is because you haven't awakened your own perception of when you've actually done that. That's why, again, you're putting that person on the pedestal. And in putting them on the pedestal, you're making your own adequacies become unconscious. And the moment you start to own the trait and to see that you actually display this trait to the same degree as them, then you're able to perceive that you and that person are on the same level and you're nothing but reflections of one another. And the moment you clear that, you're going to have, you're going to be in a state where it's a conversational interaction with the person. It's transactional in terms of it being a fair exchange, where you're not judging them for something that you believe you might not have, but instead you're seeing that person as an expression of your own self. Then remember, with the same principle of the magnet pole, and when you actually go through the DiMartini method, there's also a different section where you actually then bring to your consciousness where this individual is inadequate. So you're balancing out that magnet pole. And when you go in there, you then awaken and bring to your consciousness where this individual displayed them being inadequate. Perhaps it could be that because they are so focused on handling finances and making sure that their finances are in order, then it means that then their social life then suffers. Then it means that in their social life or the social area of life, they are inadequate in perhaps in that area. And you just find that in, so you balance out that perception. And the moment you then balance out that perception, you then will see that this person is not a personality type, but instead is an individual who at times is adequate and has got moments where they're also inadequate. And you also find within yourself where you've got moments where you've also been inadequate. So that you balance out your perception of this personality that I'm always one-sided. And you integrate both poles. And you then are in the state where you actually then see that this magnet pole can't be divided. And what's so profound about this principle, again, when you go through the DiMartini method, these are just 2 questions. Of course, there are about 14 questions that one can go through. And by the time you're done with the method, what happens is your own your own love and appreciation for this person actually goes up, because you get to see that there's nothing to change in the person, but everything to love. And that person is just nothing but a reflection of you. And so this is how you get to clear that perception or that judgment of you being inadequate, by understanding that when you put someone on a pedestal, you're just simply being too humble to admit what you see in them is actually in yourself. And when you put someone down, you're then being too arrogant to see that what they display, you also display in your own life. So just remember that no one is ever a person, and everyone is just an individual that's got both polar sides and both positive and negative poles to themselves. And that's what makes them whole, just as you have these 2 sides to yourself. So anytime you have this perception of being inadequate, find out why the judgment is there, who you're comparing yourself to, then go in and find out where you display the trait of being adequate. And when you find that out, find out who actually benefits from you displaying this, who benefits from you displaying this trait of being adequate towards yourself and others, and you actually get to awaken this within yourself. And so I just want to end by saying that all judgments are reflections, and every single trait is just an expression of love. And thank you so much for joining me today.